Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Cinema Condition, a podcast devoted to analyzing films and what makes a movie a movie. I am your host, Raul Alejandro Mendoza, a filmmaker, podcaster, and lover of cinema. Today, I am joined by Rosa Parra. They are a freelance entertainment journalist and film critic over at Latino Entertainment Journalists Association and the Online Association for Female Film Critics. And today they have selected Jayro Bustamente's La Llorona. Hey Rosa, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I am doing all right. It is a pretty chill Sunday, un domingo de hueva. That's what we
Ah,
would say,
well,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. But I'm doing all right. I'm glad that we can finally do this, and I'm glad that we're sitting here together in this meeting to finally knock out this episode. But how is your how's your Sunday been?
You know what? It's been busy just running errands, house chores y todo eso. Pero no, here in LA, we've been a little warm. So it's just staying inside in the AC. Can't complain, man. Can't complain. Pero yeah, excited that we finally get to have this conversation
Yeah,
about a movie that it's very dear to me.
yeah. Talk about the heat, dude. Oh my God, here in Texas it is absolutely disastrous. My God, it is
Yeah.
terribly hot. I'm just
I've been hearing, man. I've been seeing like on social media. Cuando me meto, I
yeah.
try to stay away as much, pero yeah, I see just screenshots of like temperatures from either the vehicles or I was like, no, three
You know
digits.
what?
I'm like, I have no idea how you guys are doing it.
You
No
know,
idea.
I'll tell you right now. Right now, in the beautiful city that I'm living in, we are at 98 degrees Fahrenheit, and it currently feels like 106.
No much.
Yep, yep. So I'm glad that I don't gotta get my ass out this house right now. I'm good. I'm chilling in here with my fan on and my AC on. I'm good because it is too damn hot out there, and yeah, I'm I wanted to go see a movie, but I was like, you know what, man? It is too damn hot. I don't want to be late for this. I don't want to be late for the other one that I got to do. So it's going
Yeah.
to be just another chill Sunday here in the house. I am going to relax. I am not going to step outside into Satan's playground. Yeah.
No, hey, I completely understand, and I am in the exact same position. I was like, no, I am not going to a movie theater either. I have a lot to catch up on, so I can just stay at home and do it there.
Yeah. But Rosa's a great, entertainment journalist, great friend of mine. She is an incredible writer. I have been very supportive of her work over at Latinx Lens. While she was doing that, she's done some other great stuff for their in their own league and Daily Chela. But Rosa, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the people because you are a new guest and we don't really know you here.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just like you just said earlier, my name is Rosa Parra, and I am a freelance film critic, currently writing for the Daily Chela and In Their Own League. I am a Rotten Tomatoes approved critic. Yeah, we've been following each other for quite some time, and we've been supportive of each other's work. And to say that it's a true pleasure and honor to be here talking to you and on your podcast is a massive understatement. So, yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for a couple years now. I'm trying to think. I want to say maybe, I don't know. I started at 2017. I can't count right now. My brain and my mathematical skills are
Yeah.
non-existent right now.
That's how I felt
Yeah.
when you asked me, like, "Oh, is it 90 minutes from now?" And I was like, "Hold on, let me math." So I started going, "Okay, one, two, three." Like,
Yes. Yeah, so I want to say like 5 or 6 years I've been doing this, and it's
yeah,
been yeah, it's been a true a very fulfilling and rewarding journey. Not only because yes, I get to sit down and talk about movies, but I think what I take most from this is the friendships and the connections and the networking I've been able to make because of film criticism, which is talking to
yeah,
people like you and having the opportunity to interview people out there, whether they're creatives, directors, actors, producers, screenwriters. Yeah, I think it's been a blast. can't complain, man. I'm very privileged and lucky to not do this obviously as my primary job. I can do it on the side. Pero to be quite honest, man, I'm loving it. Been loving every single minute of it.
Yep, and I also have to thank Rosa again. I mean, thank you for being here, but also Rosa was like the first person, also like well, the only person as of right now. When I first covered my first festival as a what's it called a journalist, I I asked her like, "Hey Rosa, like I don't know what the hell these capsule reviews means. Like what the hell does that mean? Because they're asking me to do that." And I'm like, "No, I don't know what that is." So Rosa offered her guidance real quick to me. She was like, "Hey, here you go. This is what it is, and like you can look at some of my examples." And as you know, when I have reached out for guidance, I was always met with just being left on red. So I really appreciated Rosa for taking that chance to meet with me and helping me out with her guidance. So I was really happy that you did that for me.
Oh my god. I forgotten about that, to be honest. No,
Yeah.
you know what, I if I'm going to be completely honest, when it comes to film criticism, it can be a very selfish and conservative, not, I'm not talking about politics here, conservative in terms of
Yeah.
they don't like to
Reserved.
share, yeah, share their knowledge when it comes to criticism. So I mean, and it depends on everybody's different. Everybody has their own way and methods of doing this. No, you know what? Every time I get messages asking for questions on how to apply to this or how to do this and how to do that, I'm always happy to help out. Porque if you don't lend out a hand, then como
Exactly.
how are we gonna progress and get better and more representation in terms of Latinos y todo eso. So
Yeah,
no,
that's
it
right.
was it's a pleasure, and I can't believe you remember that. Oh my god!
I always remember all the stuff, dude. I,
Wow.
I mean, I remember what I ate yesterday, but I remember when people give me a helping hand.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I
very
remember.
sweet.
Well, today we're going to be talking about Jayro Bustamente's La Llorona. We are not talking about The Curse of La Llorona. That is not the film we're talking about today. We are talking about La Llorona 2019 from Guatemala, a film that I am so thankful that Rosa picked because it's one of my favorite films of that year, and is also one of the best movies from Latin America I've ever seen. And I'm really happy that we're finally going to get to talk about it on this podcast. But because we've never discussed Mr. Jairo Bustamente, I have to go ahead and do this nice little introduction here. But before I even get into that, I want to say that information was really scarce when it came to Jairo's life. But what really helped was this essay right here called Turning Horror into Light by Francisco Goldman from the Criterion Collection's release of La Llorona. So because of that, I was able to find some good information on Jairo and his life and what his about his filmmaking career. So I had to give a shout out to that and say that I basically took a lot of information from that in this introduction and in the introduction for the film. So just wanted to say that before I get called a plagiarist or you get told that I copied something, but there was literally no information other than hey, he made Ishkanul, he made this one, and he made like all this other movie, and he's from Guatemala, and that's it. That's all I found. But thankfully, this essay had a lot of good information for me. So with that said, let me go ahead and introduce you all to the filmmaker known as Jayro Bustamente. Jayro Bustamente is a film writer and director who was born on May 7, 1977. I'm sorry. Jayro grew up during Guatemala's decades-long period of civil war, during the time the government enacted genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Mayan population. He grew up in a Mayan community and moved to Guatemala City later in his life. He studied publicity and communications at the University of San Carlos in Guatemala. During this time, he worked on in-house commercials. He committed his studies in film in Europe and returned to Guatemala to create his own production company. This led to him directing his first feature film debut, Ishkanul. His following movie was Temblores, with his latest release is the critically acclaimed film that we're talking about today, La Llorona. So yeah, it's a very recent career for Jayro Bustamente. He's not a really like super well known director, but I would say he is probably one of He's probably going to be one of the more prominent voices in Latin America in a couple of years because I think that this movie really, really positioned him to have that big voice now. And I'm just happy that we finally get to talk about him. But I just wish that there was more there was more information. I've never seen Ishkanul or Temblores. Have you?
I watched Ixtanul for, I think it was one of the episodes of Latinx Lens, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I watched it. It was the same protagonist who plays
Yes.
La Llorona here. And yeah, very, that one, it's a bit more meditative, not necessarily as, I don't want to say good because it is good. It's just not as perhaps memorable as La Llorona is, pero it does highlight the issues that a lot of Mayan indigenous people experience, and I think that seems to be his 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 playground, what he likes to do, what he likes to depict and showcase to the world. Hey, Mayans are, they still exist. A lot of people for some reason think that the Aztecs and the Mayans and then that's it and then now they're gone. No, there's still Mayans around
Oh
today,
yeah.
right now in the present. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. And I think Jayro Bustamente is a perfectly talented director to showcase everything that they experience, what they currently experiencing right now. And yeah, but yeah, Excanul is definitely it's a great film, a great directorial debut. Pero La Llorona is definitely up there.
Yeah.
Like it's, I'm gonna be completely honest, it's like easily one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah, I gotta watch. So it's Ixkanul, not Ishkanul. I'm sorry. I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, my brain goes immediately to Nawal, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh shit, no, it's Mayan. It's Ixkanul. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm not. To be quite frank with you, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correct because I'm completely lacking their native tongue skills. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
even both of us might be
We
mispronouncing it.
might be wrong.
Yeah.
Well,
Pero
yeah,
yeah, we try.
yeah. It's a movie that definitely interested me. I really wanted to see it. I know that he's been their well, he was their submission for 2019, and he was their submission for that year that Ixcanul came out. So, I mean, I'm really interested to see where his career goes. I think that he has a great career ahead of him.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I am too waiting to see what he does next because, damn, after a couple of years, I'm still thinking about this film.
Yeah. Well, let me go ahead and introduce you all to this to film La Llorona, and then from there we'll go on with the rest of this episode. But Jairo Bustamente had long wanted to create a film about Guatemala's past, but even though he had made films about the victims before, he never put himself in the shoes of the aggressors. This was apparently a challenge for Jairo to create for La Llorona. When Jairo met with the main actresses, he apologized to them for offering them the stereotypical roles of housemaids that indigenous women are known to portray in Latin American media. Jairo Bustamante tried to find inspiration in dignified female figures in horror, but reached the conclusion that there are not many of them. A lot of female horror figures are pretty much creations of misogynistic thoughts. Bustamante approached the film's casting like his last two films and sought out non-professional actors who could learn through the process of production. La Llorona marks the second collaboration with Maria Mercedes Corroy. Corroy drew from her experiences along with her grandmother's experiences during the war. A big source of inspiration came from her grandmother's silent struggle. Jairo and their crew were threatened multiple times to stop making the film. They shot in the residence of the French ambassador to Guatemala. They even threatened to shut down the production, but could not because the residence was French territory. The film premiered at the Venice International Film Festival on August 30th, 2019. The film was selected for Guatemala's entry for Best International Feature and made it to the shortlist. Yeah. So that I was like super not surprised that Guatemala tried to tell them to not make this movie. Of course, that's how that worked. Yeah, of course they would want to not let them make this movie. And but what really shocked me was like, oh shit, what's it called? They filmed on the French ambassador's whole like home and stuff. That was interesting. But yeah, uh, Rosa, why did you select La Llorona?
Yeah. Wow. So many reasons. Like I said, since I first watched it, I haven't stopped thinking about it. There's this haunting scene that every time I watch other movies or every time I sit down to either write a review or to analyze or try to gather my thoughts. Every now and then, that scene just like sneaks in, and for a filmmaker to have been able to do that, and a scene that has nothing to do like with the jump scare or nothing like that, it must signify something in my humble opinion. To me, La Llorona, I was one of its biggest supporters. I try to talk about it and try to on social media share about it. I am still bitter. It did not make the final selections for the international movies, although not surprised because the Academy tends to be biased against horror. The horror genre, although it's not, it is a little bit. It does have some elements here and there of horror, but I think it's more of a psychological and such. Pero man, I think every time this movie is so good and it's so masterfully done that every time I get asked to guest on a podcast and select a film I want to talk about, this one's easily on top of my list. I've talked about this film so many times, yet I still find myself fascinated by it. And I've seen it several times and I find new details and I find new meaning to things. And obviously, when you sit down and you watch a movie, you are watching it with the experience and the perspective that you have at that time. It's been a few years. My perspective now is not the same as it was a couple years back. It's evolved. It's changed a little. So even now, when I had the chance to watch it again, I picked a couple of things, and I actually, for the first time in my life, uh, I I won't say sympathize, pero I did find myself questioning um, the certain decisions made by certain characters in the film, and not questioning in terms of a judgmental way, but perhaps approaching it in a much more sympathetic manner. Again, not justifying their actions, pero in a very sympathetic manner, which was kind of surprising to me. Okay, I would sit down and be I'm sure we're gonna get more in detail, but let's say a typical villain, and I was driving home and I'm thinking, yes, this is the villain of the story, but I'm sure there's more complex. There's layers to this character as to why he became the way he is, as to why, whether he was pushed or he was pressure or it was a survival tactic, perhaps. He had no choice but to do this or make decisions that are obviously horrific and unethical. Pero I don't know. Sabes que I was thinking of another movie that I saw a couple years ago that stuck with me is Jojo Rabbit, right, by Taika Waititi, and the character of Sam Rockwell, who's a Nazi, pero he makes obviously bad decisions y todo. Pero at the end of the day, you realize like, did he have any other choice than to make these decisions? And man, I just found myself in this bubble of just contemplating decisions made by humans and not trying to vilify everything that I see or to just see it in a binary perspective, just black and white, and then that's it. It's the different shades of gray. And when a film does that to me, it leaves me thinking and makes me question even my own values and morals y todo eso. It's darn good in my humble opinion. I tend to go off tangents a lot. Just
So good.
FYI. Yeah, just an FYI.
It's all good. I'm glad to hear your input on that. I I watched this film a lot, like that year it came out. I actually was able to see it a little early before it dropped on Shutter,
Okay.
and I was fascinated. I was trying to watch everything, not everything because I know it was not going to be possible, but I every year I try to watch every single every submission for the international category. Whether it's nominated or not, if it's submitted, I want to get to it. Depending on distribution, you're sometimes gonna be able to watch them or not. I know that there's like a bunch of countries I have not watched their submissions because they just never make it to the United States. But this one did, and I was like, okay, I got to get to watch this because that was also the year that The Curse of La Llorona came out, and I was like, this fucking movie is trash. I said this was terrible. Like it completely, doesn't get the idea of La Llorona and who she is. It completely portrays her wrong, and even though La Llorona is a figure that has been, you know, her folklore is different everywhere. There is central things that are brought to the idea of who she is, and I felt that that movie from the Conjuring universe just spit in the face of it. Plus, it was just terribly made, but yeah. And I watched this one, and I was just amazed. I said, "Wow!" Like, and I loved the way that it discussed Guatemalan politics and really Latin American politics, and the way that sadly Latin America has been positioned for years and years to view the indigenous population. And I was just amazed by this movie. So when you said, "Hey, we're gonna do this one," I said, "Oh, thankfully, yes." Thank you. I was like, I've wanted to do this one for a while now. I did a review of it on this channel for the Blu-ray release from the Criterion Collection. I talked about mostly the quality and whether how much I liked the movie, but I haven't had the time to actually sit down and discuss it thoroughly like we're gonna do it today. So I'm glad you got to pick this one. And yeah, this movie is really, really special. I think that hopefully in the coming years we'll see more of his work probably get nominated. But they, I always say this: the Academy says if you're not the Three Amigos or and I love those three men, my personal heroes, and I love them to death. But if they're not those three men and you're from Latin America, chances are you have a slim chance of getting nominated. So it's sad, but like I'm the fact that it made it to the short list was a huge win in and of itself.
Oh no, I definitely agree. And I think the Academy is slowly but surely opening itself to other directors. Yeah, I agree in terms of the three amigos. I think those three specifically are able to go outside the international category, right? They
Yeah,
were the ones that won best directors, best picture y todo eso, best
yeah,
actor performances y todo. But I think slowly, I don't know. I'm keeping a close eye. There's a similar version of the Three Amigos, pero chilenos,
yeah.
with Pablo Larraín, Sebastián Lelio, and I am sadly forgetting the third one. That are also slowly but surely coming up
Mm-hmm.
in Hollywood. So there's a little bit of hope there. Yeah, man. I just there's so much to talk about in terms of this film. Just like you, actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that porque when I was doing Latinx Lens, there was an episode or two. I think we did two episodes where we did try to access all the entries of Latin American films that
Yeah,
were submitted for their respective countries in the international category. Yeah, it was sadly we couldn't get to all of them because we didn't have access to them, but everything we did get a chance to watch. Man, good quality, and some of them were surprising. Uh, to my surprise, there was a couple of them that actually did make the final nominations, like the mole agent from
oh
Chile.
yeah,
And I was like, man, that's also so good.
yeah,
Man, this film, just to really back in with La Llorona, there's so much to dissect, and it is like you said, politics, the politics of it all, the brilliance for Jayro Bustamente to use the figure of La Llorona and in a way decolonize that image and to tell an indigenous story, to tell their experience. And I couldn't help but to get angry, but at the same time I was grateful that yes, it takes people like a Jairo Bustamante to tell these stories for them to go out there. And now people know, like I just said, that Mayans still exist, and that sadly their history isn't necessarily the nicest and the prettiest, and it's all rosy and pinky todo eso, because it's not. um
yeah.
yeah.
Well, if it's true, and it's like the history that is accessible is the one that's not the prettiest, and it's like I wish that we could crack open these books and be like, oh, we could talk about this incredible work that the minds did, and their all their roles and all these different things that we have access to, but it's just not you're not able to like go into like a big conversation on it because it's not as accessible as it should be. But the history that is accessible from them is sadly their genocide and their very, very, very hard fight with ethnic cleansing in the 20th to 21st century. So, well, if you're ready, I am ready, Rosa. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. This is our conversation on Jayro Bustamente's La Llorona.
Lo que se quedó atrás está atrás. No penses en eso. Que no te afecte.
¿Oyó a alguien llorar?
هاي لا هاي كثير النم يكوخ إنكش كوخ نشيء. Los sirvientes se quieren ir. Todos tienen miedo.
Este encierro nos está enfermando. Mi papá a ti te contaba todo.
Te prohíbo pensar eso. Es una invasión. ¿Cuándo nos irán a dejar en paz?
تمي أهلي بالقوال شكاكلنا. أشلوكا كوشيال. شكاكا جتشيلي. شوياكا.
Lo que se quedó atrás está atrás.
All right, so let's go ahead and start this off. Usually, I would, give a little detailed recapping of like the first scene of the film, but I think that we're discussing probably the most well-known figure in Latin American culture in general, and I think that we it would be a big disservice if we don't talk about her story and her folklore. There is a lot of different stories when it comes to La Llorona. There are some who see her as, a woman who is from Mexico. There's some who see her as other parts of Latin America. There's some that believe that she was a Mexica princess and she became La Llorona in her later history. There's a lot of tellings of her, but I would like to first get our and how we were told the story, because everybody in the culture gets told the story. Mainly so that way you don't go out the house and go walk around by yourself. That's let's be honest, that's what we're told the story for. It's the same reason we're told the story of La Lechuza and like all these different things, because your kids, and let's be honest, Latino kids are freaking bastards, the little bastards. If you don't get them scared, they are gonna run around and do shit that they're not supposed to. So Rosa, I would like to open up. I want to hear about the way that you were told the story of La Llorona.
It's hilarious that you say that because, yes, my mother would tell me this story, and she would do it for two reasons. Yes, so I wouldn't be by myself outside when I couldn't fall asleep, right? So she would be like, si no te duermes, va a venir la Llorona. It depended on the day, depended on the day of the week. It was either la Llorona or el cucuy,
El
right?
cucuy. Yeah.
So no, so from what my mother used to tell me is that, yeah, la Llorona was a Mexican lady who she had two kids. She wasn't specific on the gender of the kids, pero she told me she had two kids, and she told me that the river, they had drowned in the river, that they had drowned in the river, and that La Llorona every night would come out weeping for her children. Ay, mis hijos. And I'm not going to do that because then I'm going to haunt you and traumatize you any further. Then you're going to fall asleep, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, she would tell me, sí, la Llorona, se le murieron los niños. She didn't tell me that she had killed them. She told me they had drowned in the river y que el río se los había llevado. So every night she comes out weeping for her children, and because she can't find them, she goes around stealing other people's children. And if you don't behave, if you don't listen to your parents, if you don't go to sleep and you're outside playing around, you're going to be the one she's going to be getting next. And that was the story I was brought up with.
Yeah.
The river, and then que se los llevó, and she weeps every night, and she comes and gets other people's kids, particularly those that are easy to get. So if you're outside playing late at night, ya valiste. Pretty much. So that was the one that my mother had told me, until I started hearing different versions and different ones, and I was like, wow, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I was like, okay, in my eyes she wasn't as bad because she didn't kill her children, she just lost them, she's just trying to get other kids, right? That was the part that was most scary. Pero in other stories, I'm hearing different versions. And man,
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. And even the one that they depict in The Curse of La Llorona, that was like, no manches, what's this?
Yeah.
What was the story that you grew up with?
So I was told the story about my grandmother. My
Uh-huh.
grandma, and she never specified what town in Mexico, but she said that it was on the border. She said that La Llorona was a woman who lived in Mexico. She lived on the river. She lived by the river next to the United States on the Rio Grande River, and she said that she fell in love with this very charming man who was Mexican, but he was from the United States. He lived in the United States, and that she had two children who were not his children, and that she loved this man very dearly, and that she was so in love that she believed that she could do anything for this man. And this man was, grew tired that, that she wasn't there with him and that she wanted him to be there, but he didn't want her children. And she told them that it was either me or it was the children. And the man, gave her the ultimatum, and I'm gonna guess that in a fit of denial, in a fit of psychological distress, La Llorona took the kids, her two children, who I was told were two little boys, to the river, or was it? No, it was a boy and a girl. It was a little boy and a little girl, to the Rio Grande River, and she drowned them. She killed them, and then she was very distraught, and when she went to go see the man, he had already had left the town to go and work, to go to a different town to work because he was a migrant worker. And in that fit of psychological distress, La Llorona kills herself, and when she goes up to heaven, God tells her, "You will not enter my kingdom, and you will not go to hell. You will what's it called? Spend your remaining life searching for your kids in spirit." And that's why in the river you hear her saying mis hijos, because she's trying to, what's it called, find her children so she can get into heaven, because she truly feels, remorse and regret for having killed her children for a man. Now, I think there's a lot of reasons I was told this story. one, do not go to the river because we were in the Rio Grande River. We lived on the river. We were living on the border, so we were close to the river. So you better not go in. And this was when I was told the story. Bush's fence was not built yet.
Okay.
It was not built. So that land, because so I'm from the border. I'm not talking like, oh, I lived like really outside. No, you get on my property, you look to your left, the fence is right there.
Oh wow.
So if I wanted to, I could have gone outside during that time, walked down. It was going to be a long walk because first of all, they built it on the wrong side. They didn't build it on the river. They built it like 2 miles over the river from the river. But I could have gone to the river. So I was told that story for that. Do not go and play at the river. Of course, don't be outside doing anything you don't want. And two, I think I was told that story to not grow up to be an absent father like that as well, and to be a man who leaves his woman and like that. That's probably one of the reasons why. And also, let's be real, the third reason was because, go to bed. You're gonna get found by La Llorona. like you were told too.
Yeah,
But that
yeah.
was the way that I was told the story. And that's the way that a lot of the kids that I went to elementary school with were told the story as well.
Wow, that's fascinating. You got like the whole backstory and everything.
And she'll tell you
No,
that
I,
Diosita la castigó, la mandó para abajo, and she's looking for her kids. And I'm like,
wow. Interesting. That's very compelling. Yeah, I think that one's kind of similar to what the Curse of La Llorona kind of depicted. Yeah, no, my mom never told me anything about her having a husband ni nada de eso. Interesting.
yeah, she told me that those two kids were not from somebody else, were from somebody else,
Right,
and that the
yeah.
man was very jealous of the attention that she was getting from her, that she would get from her kids. That
Hmm.
like she wanted him for herself, but when he gives her the ultimatum, and she doesn't, do it then and there, what's it called? He leaves to work at another state because he was a migrant worker.
Ah,
So yeah, it's so interesting because she's such an interesting figure, and yes, the Curse of La Llorona kind of follows that story, but it
yeah.
also kind of doesn't because if I remember correctly, and I remember this interview very well, Michael Chaves, who that's how he pronounces his name apparently. To me, when I read that name, it's Chavez, but Michael Chaves said that he had never heard the story of La Llorona. He had never been told the story of La Llorona, so he just went from what he heard. So I'm gonna guess that he heard somebody from like the border or something like that, and they told him that's where he went with that one. But I've heard the story of her as a Mexica princess who, eventually, what's it called, had children with whatever one of the men in the Mexica community, and she drowned them and whatnot. I can't remember her name, but it was a beautiful name, very beautiful Mexica name. But I've also heard the one that you're telling me. I've heard the one. I've heard different ones here and there, but she's such an interesting character because it doesn't matter where in the culture, her folklore is still kind of very similar.
Yeah.
And she's used for specific reasons to scare children so that way they don't go and misbehave. And and that's such an interesting part of our culture and the way that we've held on to these stories for generations and generations. Because if you look at that, like the Mexica one, that goes back centuries and centuries into our ancestors' stories. So I found it interesting that they chose to center this story of genocide and around around her and her story.
Yeah, I remember trying to gather as much information to do that episode where we talked about the film, and I was literally reading every article I can find that was interviewing Jayro Bustamente for this film. And in one interview, he states that the image of La Llorona is originally an indigenous one,
Mm-hmm.
and that what he does is he decolonizes her image, because in reality, she was somebody who can have visions and she would see the future, and the reason why she'd cry is because of all the horrors that she would watch that she knew was coming. So that's why she cried. It had nothing to do with her killing children, nothing to do with her and a husband. It had nothing to do. It felt like after after the colonization, they got that image, they got La Llorona, and they like ¿cómo se dice? They I don't want to say patronize it, pero they gave it, they made her look like all these, for some reason, all these historical women are always in a bad light, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's La Llorona or La Malinche or anybody else that you can think of, they are always looked upon with a negative perspective and a negative lens. I feel like the particularly the indoctrination of Catholicism throughout Latin America kind of gave it that extra push that it needed. Yeah, let's make her a full villain by her murdering her kids, and let's make it because of a man or because of something else. It felt like, para mí, it felt like, okay, now you're turning this image into I want to say patriarchy, but it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. But I'm sure you know what I'm
Well,
trying to
and
say.
that's the thing, that every single story shares that idea of like, we don't know who those kids are from. And it
Right,
kind of makes the idea of that, in the modern sense, she was a baby mama. She was someone's baby mama. But
right,
in a sense that she was like maybe a promiscuous woman, and she had
right,
sex with someone, and she had kids who, and it never brings up the idea like that, oh, maybe the man ran out on her. But it was the idea that like she had these two children who nobody knows whose it was, so it automatically makes you assume that, oh, she was promiscuous and she had children, and she, what's it called, and she's a single mother.
right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it seems like this was just another way of
Yeah,
enforcing those negative perspectives on women, pretty much.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Just like La
fascinating.
Malinche. Yeah, just like La
Yeah,
Malinche. Oh my God, that is a bigger conversation for another day. Just that. Talk about a figure that's been misinterpreted forever, right? You would think that you're, what's it called, you get told that you have no choice but to be a slave and be told to, what's it called, to translate for her, for Cortez, and then all of a sudden you become the biggest hated female figure in Mexican culture,
in history.
in history,
Yes.
yeah. And it's like,
People hate La Malinche more than they do Hernan Cortés. Make that make sense.
yeah,
It doesn't.
yeah, and it's like, you guys forget the part where he said, "You are forced to be my slave. You are forced. You have no freaking, what's it called, choice in this. You're gonna follow me, and but somehow in the way that story was told, they were like, no, she was the most hated figure, and what's it called, she sold us out, and that's why our people are not here anymore." And it's like, what?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw this little animated, I think it was an animated short film at La Live, which is one of the LA Latino festivals they have. And it was called La Malinche. I think it was like 6 or 7 minutes long. And it was so beautiful. It decolonized her image in 6 minutes. Everything that's been indoctrinated or conditioned in my head from historical books. I think I took a course on Mexican history
Yeah.
a couple of years back, and just her image, for me, again, in my head, she was the villain, because she helped. Pero again, as I apply my critical thinking skills, and I learned to be skeptical of everything and not take everything as factual, it was very fascinating and eye-opening to see just a little 6 minute animated movie
Mm-hmm.
tell me so much context about a figure that's been historically villainized.
Yeah. And so in this film, we do get a very big sense of the colonialist structure. So, I kind of broke it up here because there's colonialism. There is when the Spanish arrive and they enact the genocide of the indigenous population, wiping out most of the Mayans, and some of their history is, what's it called? Most of their history is erased, and their religion is erased. Their traces of language is erased, even though a little bit exists, so that way it can still be prominent. And this is what I love. My God, this is what I love about the internet. And there's a lot of things I hate about the internet, but there's stuff that I love. And now because of the age of information and because we have a lot of things at our fingertips, these languages are actually able to live longer now. They're actually able to come back. One of my favorite people on YouTube, Xiaoma NYC, is this guy who's a polyglot from New York. White boy, just white boy from New York, who knows all these different languages because he just learns them online. And he goes, so there's a video of him where he goes, what's it called, to Guatemala? Yes, Guatemala. And he'll just pull up on random people and start speaking native Mayan to them. And they're just like, what? And like this white, like pale white as snow boy just came up to me and is speaking to me in native Mayan tongue, but because that is available to us now, that we're actually able to learn these languages and be able to learn them. Of course, he probably has a bigger gift where he's able to memorize these things well enough, and it is hard to learn a language now as an older person, but as it was with kids. But during colonialism, their language gets mostly erased. Their religion gets erased. Their land gets erased as it becomes part of Spain, and you move into post-colonialism. You have the structure that has now completely erased, not completely erased, but it has erased the indigenous identity, has fully made you adopt the Eurocentric view of Latinidad to the point where what even is Latinidad at this point? I don't understand what it is anymore. If it's what's it called, traced to European, if it's traced to indigenous, if it's traced to this forced American culture that we've been adopted by living on the border and living on this other side. It's very different. And then, that leads into the practices of what is in this film, what is straight up genocide and ethnic cleansing. The Guatemalan government systematically wiping out Mayan and indigenous people during their brutal civil war. If you even go into reading some of the history of this war, it is horrifying what they got away with. And the fact that the movie's not lying, they got away with it. They're still getting away with it. It is very, very, very sad and very horrifying to know about all the things that the Guatemalan government enacted at that time. And finally, of course, we move into this other part of colonialism that's called neocolonialism. And neocolonialism has a lot of different moving parts to it. Here in the United States, you can see neocolonialism as gentrification in the way that it's erasing local, Latino and brown communities. But in the sense of this film, what is mostly centered around neocolonialism is the social divide between those who are closer to the indigenous identity and those who are more closer to the European identity. And these structures that have disenfranchised the indigenous people and put them in poor neighborhoods and poor parts of Latin America made it hard for them to move up in the ranks and be able to, make a name for themselves. So then they're sadly put into situations where they have to fit roles of not just labor, where they're being servants, but sadly into other parts like, prostitution and selling drugs and stuff like that. They're put into like these communities where they have to resort to things like that. And I wanted to have a conversation because it's very interesting the way that you say that Jayro has decolonized her image, because it's never told in this film. They're like, hey, she has 2 kids. No. Mostly what you take from this film is that she's weeping for the lives that have been lost from the genocide.
Right. Yes. And oh man, you just dropped so many.
I went to the whole.
I was like, wow.
I'm using 2 degrees. I'm using 2 of my big fields that I studied in the university, y'all. I'm sorry. Today I'm dropping production, and today I'm dropping the Mexican American studies that I have under my belt. So yeah.
I look like a bobblehead, just like yes.
Yeah.
¿Sabes qué? It was. Yeah, I see. I think they briefly mentioned that she had 2 children, pero it's assumed and it's a given that she lost them as part of the genocide. So again, which is the bigger conversation here. Yeah, the way that he gets that he's able to decolonize her image, and she's just there to. Y si oyes el llanto, no? You hear her kind of like weeping,
Yeah.
just a little bit,
I can't
not
remember how she said.
dramatically. Um, as I'm sorry.
I can't remember the word that she says in Mayan. I can't.
Oh
That she says
yes,
mis hijos. Like it translates to mis hijos, and I
yes,
can't. But it's every time she said like in that those scenes where she's like it haunt like my hairs are standing up right now as we're speaking.
yeah,
It
yeah,
makes
yeah.
your skin crawl and you're just like, ooh ooh.
Yes. And it's fascinating to me again que he's able to get that image and just put it in a movie where he is telling the genocide of the indigenous people, and that yeah, she is weeping for all the lives that have been lost. And I do actually love the fact that he intertwines elements that are necessarily associated with her, like the water or the bathtub. I've also heard the story of La Llorona where she drowns her kids in a bathtub.
Whew.
But again, yeah, I know that gets a little more dark there. Pero yeah, the fact that they use the bathtub or anywhere where there's water, whether it's a sink or anything, and in my eyes symbolizing all the tears, no, of all the family members that have lost all their husbands, children's, other family members due to this unfair um, genocide. That and I think what infuriates me a little more is that the U.S. was heavily involved in this, and they aided in the action and the act of all this horror. Um, Pero yeah, man, just to the opening shot, man, it's so mind-boggling.
Oof.
It just again, this movie, from the story to the framing to the cinematography, just everything. He opens the film with the wife of the general who's being accused of being in charge and having done all these horrific acts. And she's praying because I'm assuming somebody, another general, must have passed away or something. And then the camera is just slowly panning away from her. And she's just directly looking at you.
Mm-hmm.
And she's praying. This time I noticed that they are like in a circle praying. It's kind of simulated that they're holding hands, but they're not.
Mm-mm.
They're actually just like this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, interesting. That was a detail that I had escaped me, and I don't know why. Until this recent viewing. Yes, they're praying, which I mean, going back to colonization, religion, and how that is now currently the dominant thing. I mean, you and I, me, I speak Spanish, which is a European
Yeah.
Spanish, right? Well, no, not European. It's we've made it our own.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
made it our own.
If I go to Spain, voy a valer puritita madre.
Yeah.
But I'll survive in Mexico, but not in Spain.
No.
Um, pero yeah, it just goes to show how very much ingrained it is, colonization in terms
Yeah.
of language, of religion. Yeah, sadly, to see the social class divide there. And it's very interesting. I didn't know that fact that you mentioned earlier, that he apologized to his indigenous casts for casting them again, once again, as in stereotypical roles. But sadly, so many times, if we sit down and look at it, stereotypical roles are there for a reason.
Yeah.
They do unfortunately highlight something that's been happening time and time again. Yes, I am Mexican American. Yes, I like soccer and I like beans and I like tacos, which a lot of people would look upon as being stereotypical. I am stereotypical, I guess.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that in a sense, but I can see why he would feel the need to apologize to them. But I would like to think that they wouldn't mind as long as their story is being told
Yeah.
that the way that it is. And yeah, to see it depicted in this way, it's just mind-boggling. And in terms of colonization, man, what else can I say? I'm very glad that he allows the native tongue to stay in here. How they communicate with one another, and having one person translate either to the wife and the daughter, and then the granddaughter, and as well as the testimonial. Oh my god, that testimonial! That's the scene that I'm telling you that has haunted me since I first watched it.
That one for me, and the one where the general goes to the restroom and she sees her on the tub and it's like really dark,
Yeah.
but the light is like really exaggerating her face and her long
Mhm.
hair, and she's like naked
Yeah.
and she's just looking into it, and I'm just like, oh, I'm like, no, I'm like, oh my god, this is haunting, but it's also very mesmerizing, kind of
Yeah.
showing like, yes, like she is this figure that you just want to go to her, like you want to go to her, like, but she's also very scary.
Yes. Absolutely. And man, that I can talk all day about just
Yeah.
the testimonial scene, porque when she starts talking, um, she starts talking in her native tongue, and she starts testifying what happened to her. And one of the interviews that I was reading along, I learned that that lady had only agreed to be part of the movie if she actually shared her experience. So everything you hear that happened in that scene, it actually happened to her, and that was her only um, deal. She's like, I'll be in your movie, but you just let me share my own experience, which makes it even more haunting, makes it
Yes.
more tragic to hear her speak this. And it feels just, man. I'm literally like at lost of words. Trying, attempting to articulate what that scene makes me feel, because it's just so powerful.
Yeah, and I wanted to, and it's like you're saying decolonization with the image, but it's really interesting how the film kind of brings in these different examples of the indigenous identity. So, of course, we can't discuss indigenous identity without having to sadly discuss, genocide,
Yeah.
their roles as servants. But there's also something really interesting that gets brought up in this movie about the general, and is the way that the wife has said like he's always been really attracted and really like you know attracted to, and I'm sorry but I'm going to repeat what the film says, but he's been what's called attracted to la India, to the Indian woman. And it's very interesting because the indigenous image has always been sexualized. um Come on, y'all, we've all been to that one Mexican restaurant where they have that one Aztec painting where the Aztec woman has her big breasts just out and she's like this, and the man is holding her like, and it's usually a European man who's like holding her like that, and it's like, you're like I'm just here to eat, and somehow you got a freaking what's it called, a bare naked lady here on the top, just like showing her fucking boobs and shit. But it's always been sexualized, and sadly, the history of the indigenous image is one that is rooted in the assault and the invasion of the bodily autonomy of indigenous women. And this, man being told like kind of being told that the general had an affair with the main woman who works there, like the one
Hmm.
who what's it called is the like she's the manager of the different housemates, which not really manager because she still works, but she's the one who leads all of the different domestic workers there.
Hmm.
And it's like meant to explain how like he's also very attracted to the image and the haunting nature of La Llorona in this movie. And they think like, oh, it's because he's just being a creepy old man who's always been into like the other and been very seduced by the image of the other, even though he has no trouble being able to wipe that image away from, you know, the Guatemalan history.
Right. Yeah, and here we go again. I think this has a lot to do with the wife, incredible actress. Because after the movie, I completely hated her character. Although at the end of the movie, I feel a little like, okay, I see why you are the way you are. Doesn't necessarily mean I agree with her actions, but just throughout the movie, the way she refers to them, the way she talks about them, and the way she thinks of them, it's so unnerving and very. I can't. I get furious when people just diminish other people just for being different. Like, really. And that scene that you were talking about when she's sitting on the bathtub and how it all ends, and she is the one to be blamed, because she was dressed provocatively.
Yeah.
He gets out of the hook. He's just there. He fakes like an asthma attack or something, and he just walks away freely. Pero she makes sure to tell, the quote unquote Llorona, as you people want to refer to her, that she needs to dress differently now. She can be dressed provocatively. And that was like, wow, this is just, man. I get very upset and angry and invested when a movie is this good, right?
Yeah,
And
of
I
course.
think this is the power of cinema and what movies can do to you. And it just tells you a lot about
Yeah.
how they're just looked down upon and how they're thought of, unfortunately. Although, and this is something I never thought previously as this viewing. I don't know necessarily what I would do if I were like this general's daughter. And then I had a daughter, and I had to explain to my daughter what her grandfather did and why he's in court, or why he's being yeah, like in court or whatever. I don't know how to handle that. I don't know how I would handle that either. So how do you?
That's that's the part here, because we know how important and central family is to the
Yeah.
culture. And for
Yes.
them to all be there in that home and be like, how do I explain to my daughter that her grandpa is a war criminal
Yep.
and that he's being put in court because he's murdered all these innocent people who, and it's like, look, I what's it called? When I grew up, I'm not, I've never been well off, but my mother made it a mission because she had to live in her, she had to, what's it called, work, and my father worked out of town,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes my grandma just wasn't able to take care of us. So what she did is that she would employ workers from the neighboring border town
Okay.
from Mexico. And most of these women were very much indigenous looking women. But what's it called? She, of course, never mistreated them, never screamed in their face and said anything. Even though, fun fact, one of them gave me scabies, which was not
Oh.
fun. Yeah, I got fucking like scabies from that, which was not cool. I'm not going to be here and generalize and saying that, all domestic workers are dirty, but I'm just going to say that one domestic worker who worked with us, it was not fun. It was not fun. I remember being in elementary school, getting sent to the nurse because, like, what's this? And it's like, oh, you have scabies. It's like, what happened? It's like, well, I fell asleep with the I fell asleep, and what's it called, the worker, what's it called, I guess I was a kid, so she was like, just sleep with him. And it's like, yeah, I'm guessing that's where I freaking got it from. But but point is, the workers become part of the family, even though they're still thought of the role of servants. And you can see it in the movie with the little girl. Like, she loves hanging out with her. Like, she loves being with her. It's like they get to play. They get to, like, what's it called, like, do, like, they get to, like, learn, and they get to play this game where they, like, try to see who holds their breath longer and stuff. But it's very indicative of, like, how these these uh these positions work, where, like, yes, you're servants and you're working there, but, like, you also have this close tie to the family, kind of in the way that, like, Cuaron kind of enforces it in Roma, where it's like, yes, everybody else kind of sees you as a servant, but these children are like, they're like your kids. They're your kids. You grow up to think of them as their kids, but it's hard for you to sit there and be like, your grandfather has, like, wiped out my people. Like, for years, as we've been fighting this war, your grandfather's been the one who's been ordering the execution of my people. And like I sat there and I'm like, this her daughter, the daughter, who holds like this very, you know, she still benefits from the system that's being created by the actions of her father and her mother, especially her mother being very complacent in that system as well. You can't get away from that. But I don't know if I could sit there and put my daughter down, but sit her down and explain to her and tell her that your grandfather is a criminal and why that's why we're living here right now. And that's why these people are really uneasy around him because he's probably wiped out their family members.
Yeah, I. It's so, and even then, the staff, let's say the indigenous people that work there, I don't know what like moral conflict they must have having to go to work for a
Yeah.
guy that's responsible for killing a lot of your own people. And it's, yeah, and it's situations like those that like challenge me and just makes me wonder like, oh shit. It's not, again, no black and white kind of narrative or scenario. Very complex, very dimensional in those terms. And man, that's what I find this movie to be so fascinating, because it's just so conflicting all the way around.
And it really does kind of like, let's be honest, speak to the nature of what Latin America is. Of course, you bring up the idea that, like, you bring up, not the idea, I'm sorry, it's a fact. It's what happened that the U.S. were very, what's it called, involved in this. They were, backing them. And it goes into this really hard realization that Latin America is just a pawn. Latin America has always just been a pawn. It gets colonized, and what's it called, gets exploited by by the Spanish. It gets most of its territories gain independence. It becomes independent, and then we move into this ground where, like, where all these other people, all these countries try to still somewhat assume control of Latin America. The French come in, the Dutch come in. They also try, and they still somewhat keep it civil, to keep it to what's it called, somewhat independent, and their countries do flourish. And then we hit this really interesting part in the history of Latin America, where they've opened the doors to their governments to become ruled by very far leftist governments who at the time were vilified by the United States and their anti-Soviet Union practices during the Cold War. And it leads to this exploitative part of Latin America's history, where they're just like, the United States is able to just, let's be honest, they're going to flaunt themselves in there, set up puppet governments, throw down these governments who are labeled communists because of their practices, but in the very nature of what these governments are, they're not communist at all. But because it looks like that to the American, to the American lens and the Western lens of looking at it, they've set up these puppet governments, and it leaves Latin America in this very disastrous part of their history, where they're kind of left to fend for themselves with dictatorships. And now we're actually kind of seeing this really interesting ground where Latin America is starting to like move away from that. Especially, I don't know if you're very if you're very aware of what's going down in Salvador right now.
I think I've heard a few things. Is it with the prisoners
Yes,
or?
like, what the president has now fully, like, said, like, I am tired of our country being run by gangs. I'm tired of it being run by organized crime. So, what used to be able to be involved with the government, be involved in all these things, the president has decided we are going to clean up our nation and we are going to become the superpower of Latin America. and also like you see it in Brazil now when they elected Lula, and who Lula has fully like embraced the indigenous population, and has made it so want to create policies that help the indigenous population. But like, and I know that I'm going on that tangent, but like I'm gonna bring it back to the movie. We go into this part in this movie where like you look at this country that, yeah, Guatemala is crazy. Like, I know that these movies make it seem that like indigenous people are a minority, but it's not. There is a strong presence of indigenous people in Central America, whether it's in Guatemala, it's in Salvador. They're very, very present in those areas, and the movie makes it have this idea of like that the general have wanted to enact this very old practice of wiping that image and fully embracing the ethno-Eurocentric view of what Latin America has been positioned to look like.
This is fascinating. I didn't think we were gonna go down.
You're in a podcast with an world history minor who was really looking at mostly the Cold War. I know a lot about what happened in I know a lot about what happened in Eastern Europe. That was a lot of my main focus, but I also have a brother who has a master's in Latin American history and Latin American studies, so I know a lot of this stuff. And what sadly the very, very disgusting and the very hard realities of what Latin America has been exploited to look like.
Yeah.
And I mean, what aluminum? I'm sorry. It was right now in Mexico. They have discovered a mine of this element. I believe not titanium. It's an element that is going to be a resource that's going to play a prominent figure in Mexico's future. And AMLO has positioned itself to say, we are not going to be opening doors for the United States or any other country to come and exploit us for our resource. We are going to be mining this, and we are going to be keeping it for ourselves. We are not going to be pawns, and we are not going to be exploited by these governments anymore. And because pretty much, and it's funny because the minute they found that mine, you see on the media, we need to stop the flow of the drugs. They are sending over fentanyl, and we need to send the troops over into Mexico.
Oh no.
And it goes back to this idea of what Latin America has always been. It's always been this ground of exploitative. It's been this land of exploitation since the Spanish arrived until now. It's always just been land of exploitation, whether that's monetary, whether that is social, or whether that is or territory-wise. It's always been ground of exploitation, and you see it within this movie with the indigenous people.
I mean, and it doesn't help, right, that the U.S. is one of the most imperialistic countries in the world. Oh man, I remember growing up, and again, I tell you, I'm going off tangents here.
That's okay.
And growing up and always being told, Fidel Castro this, Fidel Castro that, Hugo Chavez acá, Hugo Chavez allá, they're communists, they're bad people, blah blah blah. And of course, I was young. I didn't question the parents or the adults. I was told not to. I never understood why. Why are these two political figures forced down my throat to be looked down upon as communists or bad people? And then you grow older and then you realize, well, there's only a few people in history that did try to refuse to be the U.S. puppet. And if you refuse to be a puppet, then you're a communist.
Yeah. And let's be honest here. We're not saying that these people were not evil. They were 100%. But it's interesting that you get told a lot about them.
Yeah.
But you never get told about how evil Pinochet was. You never get told about how evil Fulgencio Batista was in Cuba.
Right.
You never get told about any of these other people. And you're like, huh. Because we've been ingrained to see it like view them as the puppet state, view them as a puppet region.
Yeah.
And it's like that. And that's where this movie really does it interesting, because it's like like Jayro has said, for once, I'm going to step into the shoes of the aggressor now. I'm going to show you how the aggressor is made to feel. So when you have all of these indigenous populations resisting, finally, it's kind of turned around. The tables are turned, and the pressure is finally put on them. Where they have been able to, and sadly, I wish that they would have been able to, what's it called? I wish that this movie was like, real life, and they'd be like, hey, like, he's not going to get away with this, but let's be real. They have gotten away with it. They've gotten away with it, sadly.
And they continue to.
Yeah, they continue to. But throughout this whole movie, after the trial, there's not a single night that there's not some sort of resistance outside. There's people knocking. There's people playing their instruments and like chanting. They want to see justice come to the forefront.
Yeah, and what I found infuriating once again is, yes, you're inside your own privileged home, and you have on the outside, you just have to look out your window and see the crowds of people seeking justice. And there's a sequence where the mother and the daughter are, I'm assuming it's the back outdoors, whatever it is, and the daughter's trying to meditate, and and the daughter and the mom sitting right next to her, and she's having a conversation with her, and she's like, Mama, I'm trying to meditate. Mama, no. I get it's the pure privilege and the
Yeah.
entitlement of
Oh,
these
man.
people. And even though I did bring up how difficult it must be for her, that she has to talk to her daughter about this, like you just said, she benefits from the system. And as much as there are a few sequences that are a bit left ambiguous, because I guess the father of her child has randomly gone missing, which makes me wonder, like, oh my god, is he an indigenous person, and like he just got killed, or the father found out who it was y lo mandó a
Let's be
get
real.
exterminated, or
Let's be real. The way that our indigenous ancestors have been seen throughout the ages,
yeah.
and it is not uncommon that in our culture there is intermixing, and let's be honest, that's probably what happened.
Yeah.
That little girl looks a little too white to be of an indigenous, what's it called, a man, but it's never really explained. But he's missing. This guy, let's be honest, it's probably either A, it was an indigenous man she was married to, or B, what's it called, he's been hiding because he was probably one of the ones who were enacting most of the genocide, and for the safety of the family, they got to get away from him so that way he doesn't like his actions are not bleeding over into her life.
Right.
Even though it's kind of dumb because their dad's the one who's who's going on fucking trial. But
Yeah.
yeah. But it's a privilege. It's a laughable privilege to be like, I'm trying to meditate. It's like, yeah, and they're out there trying to fight for the fact that their people are getting wiped out, and you're over here saying like, I want to meditate, and like,
Yeah. It's so it's hilarious and ridiculous. Pero yeah, I just feel that because she has moments of, like, after the testimonial that I was telling you about that was haunting, she's like, no paid actor would come in and give that speech unless it actually happened to them. And then the mom obviously dismisses it. Es una, are we allowed to curse in this
yeah,
podcast?
of course.
Okay, perfect. Okay. She's like, yeah, no, es una prostituta, una puta que le pagaron para decir eso. I was like, no mames, really? This is how you're gonna go? And again, the whole dilemma, the whole privilege thing, it's far more emphasized and it's accentuated by the camera work. Because when them two are having that conversation, the camera is panning. And again, I've never paid so much attention to the camera work as I have with this movie, and it's fucking phenomenal.
Yeah, and and the film kind of leaves it like open ended as to how, like, it's like, oh, did she get him? Like, did he actually die? Or, but mostly what it's trying to insinuate is that the struggle is going to be forever, and like you're saying, she's having visions of, like, to me, not just the past but the present and the future of it all. You know, and in the future of the people who are going to be, still be wiped out because that war, if I'm correct, that shit didn't even end until like the 90s or the 80s,
Yeah.
and it's it's a very powerful movie. A movie that I'm really glad that you selected. Is there anything else you want to go into before we end it here?
Yeah. You know what? I wanted to get your quick ideas porque ever since I've seen the movie multiple times, I always get a different interpretation, or at least I come up with a different interpretation. So, like towards the end, I'm assuming it's the third act of the movie. The mother or the wife of the general, I don't know if she's dreaming or we're getting flashbacks of how or what's happening. So you get flashbacks of her being one of the victims of these generals and the genocide and everything that's going on, right? And she's walking around with two little kids, and she sees how those unfortunately little kids are drowned. So I'm thinking, are these flashbacks, or is this the work of La Llorona trying to give her a different perspective of everything that they've been
Mm-hmm.
experiencing, or what is it? Because I'm like, there is no way she's indigenous. Pero también,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be judgmental or biased and just be like, no, you have to be this specific skin tone or
No. Yeah.
color in order for you to be indigenous or not.
I think it's the work of La Llorona because
Yeah.
if you think about it, they have long been told, "Ay, pobrecitos, just put yourself in their shoes." Like, they're why should they have to pay for the sins of their fathers? You know,
Hmm.
it's like, oh, nomás es la mujer de él. Like, what is she? She doesn't have any power as the woman of the house. Like, you've been told like, "Ay, pobrecitos," like just like, but like nobody's ever been told like, yeah, think about what they've been through. Think about what the indigenous people have been through. And like, I think the Llorona, what's it called, does that to her, and it's like, here, let me show you exactly what it looked like, and let me show you what happened to me, and what happened to everybody who he's been executing.
And you think La Llorona is actually alive? Because we see in that sequence how she gets shot in the head.
Yeah, I I don't know, I don't know, because remember they do like cleanse the man, like, which by the way, another beautiful, what's it called, work done by the camera, right, with the cinematographer and everything. But I love the way that they framed the ceremonial like cleansing with the sage
Hmm.
of the man. And I don't know, like part of me thinks that she isn't alive, and she's just been like that. She's just been, her spirit lives throughout all these different women, just like the story has lived through all these different parts of our lives and part of our culture's lives. So I feel
Right.
like she did die, but she's just, her spirit lives throughout all of these indigenous women.
Right.
It's
That's
interesting though.
beautiful.
I've never thought about that part like that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. I'm telling you, every time I watch it, siempre agarro otras cosas.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, because I thought at first I was like, okay, no, she's alive. They just got her, and then she just has these supernatural powers or something.
Yeah.
But after seeing the dream sequence or something, I'm like, wait a minute. No, I think she did die, and it's just her coming back and just being haunting and
Yeah.
trying to remind other people of what happened to them.
Well, Rosa, I thank you so much for coming on. I love this conversation. We did a great job here. I think that this was a great movie to talk and dissect here,
Mhm.
even though we did go on our respective tangents here.
We have to.
We had to, I had to put all my college work into play here. Come on, like
Right?
nobody ever
Yeah.
I never get the chance to do that. Come
There
on.
we go.
Yeah.
No, you got nothing to apologize for.
Yeah.
No, porque sabes que no, everything you gave, it certainly gives more context to the film because sadly a lot of Latin American countries do have similarities in their history. So no, it came in very much handy. No, thank you so much for inviting me, and I apologize for my tangents because now you know what I was told when I was little. No, this was a complete blast. I can genuinely talk about this film all day.
Thank you, and I thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we finally were able to do it. But Rosa's not done yet. if Rosa will be happy to grace us with her presence for season 3 of the Cinema Condition, she does need to select a movie. So, Rosa, what is the movie that you're going to select for next season of the Cinema Condition?
Ooh la la. I thought about it a lot.
Okay.
I don't know if you've done this one or not, but you know what? I'm gonna stick to my Latin American cinema because it doesn't get the recognition and acknowledgement it deserves. It's always looked down upon. Pero man, this is challenging. This is challenging.
I know.
Have you? I guess we're gonna keep it political. Have you seen No? From Pablo Larraín, starring Gael García Bernal.
Which one?
No,
No.
no,
N-O?
yeah,
No. No.
yeah,
No, I
no.
haven't. No, I haven't. No. Yeah.
Well, Pablo Larraín, along with Sebastián Lelio,
Yeah.
they always do pride themselves, particularly Pablo. He has done a lot of his Chilean movies surrounding the Pinochet
Oh,
dictatorship.
yeah.
So here we go again. And I think it was also nominated for an international film in representation of Chile. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would love to talk about that one. Very similar conversations in terms of the politics and so on, and how Pinochet was one of the very, if not the only, dictator to been thrown out democratically.
Yeah.
He was voted out.
Yup.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, I'm happy that you selected this. I love Larraín. I think he's an incredible director, and this will also give us a really good opportunity to discuss this recent huge boom for Chilean cinema. I recently had the beautiful privilege of being able to watch The Eternal Memory,
Oh
which
my God!
which is
Yes.
my second favorite movie of the year so far.
Isn't it
I
heartbreaking?
Oh man, I am somebody whose grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia, and it
Oh
was
man.
painful. There was a woman who was there at the screening, who after everybody left, she was just there, crying and bawling her eyes out, and it
Oh
was what a beautiful movie, but so heartbreaking and hard to sit through, and
yeah.
I felt it there. I wanted to cry, and I was like, oh. But at that point, there's no tears left for me to cry when it comes to that stuff. It's just it's really rough. But it was amazing, and I really want everybody to watch that movie when it finally comes out, because it
Yeah.
was so good. But she's an incredible director too. She's somebody who is like such a prominent voice as well. Like I can't wait for her career to like take these next steps, because she is such an incredible director.
Oh, I co-sign everything you just said. Maite, I think it's Maite Alberdi. She's
Yeah.
the also the director of The Mole Agent.
Mm-hmm.
She's going down this path of depicting what the elderly generation experiences, whether it's at a home or whether it is with Alzheimer's or anything like that. Man,
Mm-hmm.
she's so talented. I
She really
absolutely
is.
loved. Yeah.
Well, we are going to be doing none next time that you hear Rosa on season 3. But for now, I want to thank her so much. She's great. Thank you so much for being on here, Rosa. Do you want to let the people know where they can find you on the internet and all that stuff?
Of course. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Rosa's Reviews. You can also check out my work at thedailychela.com and at intheirownleague.com. Raul, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy.
No, the pleasure is
We
all
got to do
mine.
it.
Thank you so much. Of course, you can keep up to date with me on all things social media by following me at the Nerd Chicano. That is on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Serialized, TikTok, and on Twitch. It's the same name on all of them. I keep it super easy for you guys. It would be really appreciated if you all go and check that out. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider leaving a like on the video, subscribing to the channel, clicking that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode of the Cinema Condition Season 2 when they drop. And of course, if you're listening to us on the audio side of things on the podcast platform, leave a 5-star review. It would be greatly appreciated as well. This was a 5-star conversation, so it deserves that 5-star for the podcast page. And of course, if you want to listen to this episode months in advance, because this doesn't drop until maybe September or October, I can't remember. But it's going to be a minute, y'all. So if you want to listen to this in advance, patreon.com/thenerdchicano. At the $5 tier, you get early access for this episode and video essays that I get to work on. So check those out, y'all. And of course, it is not mandatory, but it is greatly appreciated. Check out what I'm doing over there with the Nerdcore at nerdcore.com, Twitch, and on YouTube at the Nerdcore. We're doing a lot of cool stuff over there, so just check that out. And of course, like I said, I'm not telling y'all what's coming next. I'm just saying thank you all so much for listening to this episode and watching us here. It was greatly, greatly appreciated that Rosa stopped by, and I can't wait for her to come back for No.
No.
No. Yeah, see. And to my wonderful cinephiles and renowned scholars, celebrate the love of cinema today, tomorrow, and every day after. Catch you on the next one, guys. Bye-bye.